Welcome to the introduction to midpoints in vibrational astrology. So I'm creating this video for two different reasons. One, it is a lesson for my students that are taking the Vibrational Astrology Essential course, and that is course number VAE 100. And two, because it is going to go on YouTube, and I think that it will be a great discussion to have about midpoints and how people use midpoints. I welcome you to let me know how you use midpoints or how you found this discussion, if it is something that you've used in your practice or not, because I'd love to hear what you have to say. I'm going to go through a few different concepts here. First off, I'm going to talk about what midpoints are. And then I'm going to talk about direct midpoint structures and indirect midpoint structures. I'm going to be then taking you through a few different concepts to demonstrate different things in charts. And I'm going to tie it all together at the end so that all the little pieces that you got are going to tie together nicely. And then I'm going to give you a practical application and how you can use midpoint structures. So I do want to mention that there is a little bit of math that I'm going to talk about in this. I wanted to mention it because I don't want you to get scared away when I start talking about the math part, because one, I'm not actually a math person. So, for me to say that it's not a lot of math, that means a lot, trust me. And two, because math is really fundamental to astrology as a whole, because math is how we calculate what's going on up in the stars and the sky, the planets, and all of that. I think that's a really important part to remember, because math is fundamental to astrology, that if you understand what's going on in the cosmos, even if you don't want to do the calculations in your head, which you don't need to because we have software to do that, but even if you don't want to look at the calculations in your head, understanding what's going on in the 3D realm is really helpful in making interpretations useful and helpful in communicating that to your clients, or communicating that to yourself if you're just reading for yourself, or communicating that to anybody you're looking at with their chart. So I like to include that extra layer of understanding things from what's going on in the cosmos level, and that is where the math comes in. I also want to mention that learning little basic astronomy things is really going to help and enhance your astrology. I think that it was for me very much. And I think that everybody I've taught things to, they seem to grasp onto the concepts better by understanding the astronomy of it. This also goes down, it speaks to VA as a whole. So VA is an evidence-based approach to astrology. And although you can learn VA from a teacher of VA, like myself, I teach VA, but what I'm teaching you, or anybody else is teaching you at VA, is teaching you, they're teaching you the ideas that have been worked on and rigorously tested and researched through a group of researchers in vibrational astrology. So this is something to really note, because it makes vibrational astrology different than other systems of astrology, because it has been researched like this. I'm not saying that other systems of astrology haven't been researched, because I do know that they have been, and other people have ways of researching it. But VA is very different and specific in the way that it is done, and the way that it is taught is it is taught from the space of the research is how we understand this. The other thing that I want to mention is that this video is not going to be about interpretations. I could make another video on interpretations, and I could potentially do that if there's interest in it. Let me know in the comment section if there's interest, or if you'd like to know a different topic that you'd like to see me talk about. Let me know, because I'd be happy to see if I can work on a topic like that for you. I feel like I'm going to try to put out a video every week about a different concept or idea. So if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, then please join so that you can get notified when I put out new videos. If you don't know me already, hello, I am Starlene. I make videos on vibrational astrology. I also teach vibrational astrology and am a consultant. And I also teach tarot, and I make videos on tarot and put them on this channel as well. If you're interested in learning VA, you can check out my website, my SiriusAstrologySchool.com website. Sirius is spelled like the star, Sirius. And if you would like to learn what classes and courses I have coming up, just check out that website. Also, if you would like to get a consultation from me, or you would like to learn Reiki or tarot from me, you can check out my other website, which is starrycreations.com. I will say that the links to these websites are in my description box. The software that I use is the Sirius 4.1 software. That is what I use to create the charts and such in this video. So I will leave a link to that software and how you can get it down below. And I will tell you, if you're a student of mine, let me know, because I can give you a discount code, but I can only give the discount code to students of mine. With that said, let's dig into midpoints. So, okay, to first understand midpoints, we have to understand how the zodiac structure is. So, midpoints are independent of the zodiac. And so understanding the 360-degree circle of the zodiac is really helpful. The zodiac is a great circle. A great circle means that it's a circle around a body. It could be a circle around my body, or a circle around the earth, because that's what we're talking about here. So this 360-degree circle around the earth is what creates the zodiac that we know. And the zodiac is divided into 30 segments each. There's 12 of them, and each one of those 30 segments create another zodiac sign. So as we know, the tropical zodiac starts at 0 degrees of Aries, which is the very first day of spring. And it goes on through the zodiac, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, until we get back to Pisces to Aries, and then it goes again. That's an entire year. And that's how the tropical zodiac works. So a little bit more about understanding the zodiac structure for 360 degrees. This is helpful to remember. Aries starts at 0 degrees and 0 minutes to 29 degrees and 59 minutes of the zodiac. And then at the 30-degree mark is when Taurus begins. So from 30 degrees to 59 degrees and 59 minutes, that's Taurus. And then at 60 degrees, Gemini begins. This is the pattern that goes through the zodiac so that you can understand how we understand the zodiac. This pattern of 30 degrees segments continues around until we complete the cycle of 360 degrees. So a little deeper. I've made the list on the left here. This is something for you to memorize if you don't know it already. If we're going to look at a planet at 15 degrees of Libra, we see on this list that Libra is 180 degrees on the 360 degrees, all the way to 209 degrees and 50 minutes. So that would be the 30-degree segment that is Libra. So if we're going to think about a planet that's at 15 degrees Libra, we're going to say 180 degrees the beginning of Libra, plus 15, so that would be 195 degrees. So that would be where that planet is on the circle of the zodiac wheel. So the 360-degree circle. Like I said, it's important to memorize this, and we're going to explore why we would want to memorize this, specifically for the idea of midpoints. Midpoints are independent of aspects. So, we need to look at the zodiac from a different perspective. So what is a midpoint? Midpoints represent the degree of the zodiac that's exactly halfway between any two given planets. So considering this is the shortest distance through the 360-degree circle, I'll explain that more in the next slide. So these points can be planets, they can be asteroids, they can be angles, they can be fixed stars, they can be something like Black Moon Lilith, they can be any particular thing that you want to study. So between that and another one, that spot in the middle is going to be the midpoint. Midpoints, they are very powerful, and they create an interesting and unique point in the chart, integrating the energies of both of those planets involved. And that midpoint degree in the center of the midpoint is a focal point of potential. If you look at the diagram down below, you can see Mercury, the midpoint of Mercury and Pluto, that's how that's written, is 12 degrees Cancer, 34 minutes. So you can see how we would write a midpoint. So midpoints in vibrational astrology. So in VA, we have strong confidence that midpoints are important astrological configurations, especially when they have 3 or more planets involved. And when a third planet's involved in the midpoint, it is called a midpoint structure. But when a third planet is at the middle part of the midpoint, either through being in the middle part as a conjunction, then it is a direct midpoint structure. Same with if it is at the opposite spot of the midpoint between 2 planets, then it is called a direct midpoint structure, even if it's a conjunction or an opposition. Direct midpoint structures emphasize nuanced interactions, and they are sometimes overlooked in modern conventional methods of looking at the chart. Then we can look more at the direct midpoint structures. When the third planet or the significant point is conjunct or opposition the midpoints of 2 other celestial bodies, we can use the terms near and far. So when we have a midpoint that's at the conjunction of 2 planets, like you see in this image here, that would be the near midpoint because it's conjunct, meaning it's at the smaller space between the 2 planets on the 360 degree. And then if we have a planet at the opposition of the midpoint, it would be called the far, or opposition, right? And instead of having the conjunction symbol in the middle like this image is, it would have an opposition symbol, which is 2 circles and the line. So the direct midpoint structures highlight potential in the chart where there can be specific growths or challenges that can manifest in a person's life. They are based on the energies that are introduced between the planets that are involved, and they're based on the energy of the vibration that they're in. We also have indirect midpoint structures. I think it's important to cover indirect midpoint structures as well, because I've had questions about, well, how do we use this? So this will help clarify those questions. An indirect midpoint structure occurs when the third planet is making an aspect other than a conjunction or opposition to a midpoint. In vibrational astrology, we approach indirect midpoints differently in a unique way because we use vibration charts. So we'll go over this in a moment when we talk more about the indirect midpoint structures in a chart. I'll explain to you what that means visually. So one other thing to know here is that vibration charts are also called harmonics, and they are magnifications of the natal chart, meaning that if we're going to talk about the 4th vibration, that means that the 4th vibration is the natal chart magnified 4 times. If we're going to talk about the 10th vibration, that means that it's the natal chart magnified 10 times. Any number that you use calling it that vibration is because the natal chart is magnified that many times. And that's what we're looking at with this vibration chart. So our person that we're going to use as an example is Meryl Streep, and this is her natal chart here. I took the aspect lines out because they're not relevant, but I wanted to share her natal chart so you can see the demonstration of who we're looking at. This is also her midpoint structures up here at the top, her near, far, and her indirect midpoint structures. As you can see, this red circle here is Neptune making a square to the Mercury and Pluto midpoint structure with a 10-minute orb. We're not going to bother with Mars and Pluto over here, although that is relevant. We're not going to talk about that in this particular video. So we're going to talk about Neptune squaring the midpoint between Mercury and Pluto. And so that we know where that midpoint is, we look over here underneath. These are the midpoint listings, and we see where the midpoint for Mercury and Pluto is at 12 degrees Cancer and 34 minutes. So this is an indirect midpoint structure in the natal chart. if you look through this chart, you can't see it very clearly. But what we know from looking at that midpoint listing is that the Mercury Pluto midpoint is 12 degrees 34 minutes of Cancer. So I made this pink circle here and wrote 12 degrees 34 minutes of Cancer. And we know that that is the midpoint between Pluto over here and Mercury over here. So I couldn't tell you just by looking at that, because I'm not a mathematician, that this is the midpoint structure and this is where it would be. So this is where looking at the midpoint structures can be really helpful for you. But what we can see is that we know Libra and Cancer by sign they're square from each other. And we know that we have the indirect midpoint structure over here at 12 degrees, 34 minutes of Cancer. We can see that we have Neptune making a square at 12 degrees and 24 minutes of Libra. Okay, so this we can see, it's fairly easy to see, but we had to think about the midpoint and look to see where the midpoint between Mercury and Pluto is. The trouble with this is that each one of these planets and points have a midpoint, and we have to calculate each one. But instead of doing that, we can use software that will calculate it for us, that will help us to understand that better. Let's just break this down a little bit further so you can understand why we're talking about the 360 degrees. Here's our midpoint structure up here. Our planet is Neptune. Neptune is at 12 degrees and 24 minutes of Libra. So if we look over here and we see Libra, Libra starts at 180 degrees on the zodiac. So we would add 12 degrees and 24 minutes to 180, and we would come up with 192 degrees and 24 minutes. With Mercury, it is at 10 degrees and 17 minutes of Gemini. So we would look over here on this list and we would say Gemini starts at 60 degrees. So we would add 10 degrees and 17 minutes to 60, which would give us 70 degrees and 17 minutes. So that would be where Mercury is on the 360 degrees. And then finally, we have Pluto. And Pluto is at 14 degrees and 51 minutes of Leo. So we would look over here to see that Leo starts at 120 degrees. And then we would add 14 degrees and 51 minutes to that. And that would bring us to 134 degrees and 51 minutes. Now, this is important because remember, we're not talking about the signs. We can also look at it from the same perspective of where each planet is on the 360 degree wheel. This is the math part. This is the math part for math nerds. If you're not a math nerd, just stick with me here. We see that the midpoint of Mercury and Pluto is 12 degrees and 34 minutes of Cancer, right? We talked about that. In 360 notation, it's 102 degrees and 34 minutes. And if we look over here, we know that our focal point, the planet on the top, is at 192 degrees and 24 minutes. So what we would do is we would subtract the amount of degrees that is the square. So that's 90 degrees. If it was a trine, it would be 120 degrees. If it was a sextile, it would be 60 degrees, and so on and so forth. So to do that, we would subtract 90 from 192 degrees and 24 minutes, and we would be given the number of 102 degrees and 24 minutes. That's what we get when we subtract 90. And what does that leave us with? That leaves us with a 10-minute orb. And you see over here, the 10-minute orb. So now that I've explained all that to you, is it too much math? Are you guys ready for some good news? The good news is we don't need any of this math because we have modern technology to allow us to be able to understand things much quicker than doing the math. So let's review what we know. We know that squares and oppositions are a quarter of a circle or a half of a circle. And in the natal chart, when we have squares and oppositions, they are what we call 4 vibration aspects. So what this means is that the squares and oppositions are in the energy of 4-5. So the squares and oppositions in the natal chart. So Meryl Streep has this indirect midpoint structure in her natal chart. She has the indirect midpoint structure of Neptune squaring Mercury and Pluto. And we just understood that from the previous slides. So the question is, will this indirect midpoint structure from the natal chart show up in the 4 vibration chart? Let's look at our 4 vibration chart and 4 vibration midpoint structures to find out. By the way, this is her 4 vibration chart. I'm going to show it to you with all of the notations that I put on it. And this is her 4 vibration direct midpoint structures. And I took the indirect midpoint structures out because we don't look at them in the vibration charts. So what we see here is we see Neptune opposition midpoint of Mercury and Pluto at 42 minutes. That's interesting, isn't it? It's a different orb. And then we see the midpoint, where the midpoint actually is between Mercury and Pluto. Let's look at what that looks like in the 4 vibration chart. We see Mercury-Pluto midpoint is 20 degrees of Scorpio and 17 minutes. You see that in the pink right here. I put it down here. And then we have opposite that, 19 degrees and 35 minutes is Neptune. So this is really interesting because it has a 42-minute orb. If you do the math, it has a 42-minute orb. And this is the midpoint between Pluto and Mercury. This midpoint is a resonance between these 3 planets. Also, this midpoint here, if you have a transiting planet that hits this midpoint here, it makes this whole thing light up in terms of resonance. So, did the indirect midpoint structure in the natal chart turn into a direct midpoint structure in the 4 vibration chart? Yes, it did. Neptune at the opposition midpoint of Mercury and Pluto in the 4 vibration chart. There it is. There's the picture of it. So as you see, we do not need to use indirect midpoint structures in the natal chart because if they are strong enough in orb, then they appear as direct midpoint structures in vibration charts. We use the 4 vibration chart to demonstrate this because it was a square. If we were going to look at this midpoint and it was a trine, we would use the 3 vibration chart to see it, or 6, or 9. We would use the family of 3, what we call the family of 3. This is important to know. So we can't go away from this discussion without discussing midpoint orbs, the midpoint structure orbs. And the orbs that we use in VA that we find to be most strong and have most confidence is under a degree and 30 minutes. So under a degree and a half, if it's closer to a half a degree, then it's even stronger. If it's under a degree, it's really there, but as close to 0 as possible, the better, because the smaller the orb, the stronger the midpoint. And that's true of any aspect that you're looking at in anyone's chart. So some of the things to consider with this example we used with Meryl Streep is that the orb is larger in the direct midpoint structure. As you can see over here, we put Neptune square the Mercury-Pluto indirect midpoint structure in the natal chart with a 10-minute orb. And then the direct midpoint structure is over here. This is the direct midpoint structure in the 4 vibration is Neptune opposition Mercury and Pluto with a 42-minute orb. So the orb is bigger in the 4 vibration chart. If this was an exact 0 degrees, 0 minutes midpoint in the natal chart, then this orb would be much smaller in the 4 vibration chart. But since we are looking at magnifications of 4 in the 4th vibration chart, then we can expect the orb to likely get bigger. So this is just something to keep in mind. And this also speaks to how significant these really small orbed midpoints are in the natal chart and how much more important they are in the vibration charts because they spread in the vibration charts. Even though we're looking at a stagnant chart, they spread even further when we look at vibrations, especially higher vibrations. So this is something to kind of keep in mind and know that when you get something really tight there, that is really something important and meaningful to the person. So direct midpoint structure applications. In natal charts, we just talked a lot about this. We use direct midpoint structures, and they reveal inherent and dynamic parts to a person and how they behave, their behavior patterns. They help identify key themes and focuses in a person's life. In transit, we can take someone's midpoint between two planets, and we can look at a transiting planet that hits that midpoint, and we can see a resonance there. Likewise, we can do that if it's a transiting midpoint and a natal planet. We can look at it from both perspectives. In compatibility, we would use this method by taking one person's midpoint of two planets and looking at the third person's planet being involved with that midpoint. So that's another way to look at it. Midpoints are also used to make up composite charts, not midpoint structures, but midpoints make up the composite chart. That's what a composite chart is, and that is used in compatibility. We can also use the midpoints in progressions. Likewise, looking at it either in natal or transit, we would look at a midpoint either in natal or a progressed midpoint to a natal or progressed planet that would be creating a resonance between those three planets. In a progression, though, because they move so slow, this is indicating a change or a season, a progression or a growth or a transformation of sorts. So that is 4 different ways in which we can apply this information to look at midpoints from a perspective of looking at it from vibrational astrology. In conclusion, using vibration charts to find midpoint structures eliminates the need to separately analyze indirect midpoint structures. They are naturally integrated into the vibration charts as either, if they're strong enough, there'll be either direct midpoint structures, opposition, or conjunct. Also, using direct midpoint structures in vibration charts provide a comprehensive view, highlighting these very nuanced insights, these very specific ways in which these planets are working with us, and they become a powerful tool to understanding the deeper vibrations interplayed within the astrological chart. So I was reminded as I was creating this presentation for you that there's a quote, and it goes, simplify, simplify, simplify. And it's by Henry David Thoreau. And I was reminded by this because in vibrational astrology, I know it's a lot to learn. Any system of astrology is a lot to learn. However, vibrational astrology does simplify things. Learning all the little pieces of it, it's definitely a lot to learn. But once you have it down, it becomes simple and beautiful. So I want to say thank you for watching. Again, feel free to subscribe to my channel and let me know if you have any ideas or questions about what I mentioned. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye-bye.